Hi there, folks. Welcome to yesterday's news for November 9th, 2018. So, big story that I want to talk about today is the report showing global birth rates have declined dramatically over the last few decades, and are actually, the global average right now is half of what it was 70 years ago, and is currently just barely above replacement levels for the global average. And also that half of countries actually have a birth rate below replacement levels, which poses a problem. There's lots of economic and sociological issues with declining population. So that's something we want to avoid, and that's largely why we're having these big pushes for immigration in Europe, etc. Because they're not having their own kids, so they're importing more people to try and keep that economic balance going. And I'm not going to debate about that tonight. I don't, that's been done a lot, and it's a difficult topic because people get confused about the difference between race and culture and ethnicity and demographics and all that, and so it's very hard to have a productive conversation because you end up bogged down in definitions, trying not to offend each other, and instead of actually talking about the real questions. So rather than try and talk about the dire implications of this trend, I'm going to share my story about why I have bucked that trend. So if you follow my channel, my last video I mentioned that my 7th child was recently born. So I'm definitely doing my part to keep the population going, but that was not always my intention, nor my wife's. So we both grew up, pretty typical Midwestern, middle class life. I had one brother, she had a brother and 2 sisters, and when we first started dating, we totally had this plan. We're gonna get married, we're gonna finish school, we'll get married, and then we'll both have degrees, and we'll work for a while, pay off our student loans and everything, and then sometime in our 30s we'll have 2, maybe 3 kids, and call it a day. But that's not how life works out. We ended up not graduating at the same time, so we got married before, and I got a job out of state before she finished her bachelor's degree, so she had to transfer schools, which delayed her graduating. And then we had our first child unexpectedly about 2 years after we got married, and it was kind of that interferes with our plans, but sure, it's fine. We'll work with it. And we were happy. Obviously, we're happy about having a baby, and that was cool. But this plan didn't change. We were still she was gonna finish her degree. We're gonna pay off her student loans, and we're not gonna have more than 2 or 3 kids, right? And sure enough, 2 years later, we had a second child. And my wife was studying biochemistry and couldn't do her classes while pregnant because she had labs that involved chemicals that were hazardous and such. So this, kind of disrupted our plans pretty significantly. So after the second child, we said, okay, we're going to do something about this. We're going to take control of this plan, and we started taking precautions to prevent further reproduction at the time. And we weren't, super vigilant, but we were making a sincere effort, and it didn't work. So a few months later, we found out she was pregnant again, and we were very frustrated. Now I look back and I'm horrified and I'm embarrassed that I was angry and annoyed about a new life coming into the world. But I was, because it wasn't my plan. It went against my plans, and it was, the way that the world says is irresponsible. You're not supposed to have kids if you're not rich, or you're not supposed to have kids unless you can pay for them to go to college. You should. It's irresponsible to have more kids. That's the attitude that we thought was in the world, and so we were frustrated. And after a couple months, we'd finally kind of come around to acceptance and eventually to being happy about there being a new child. And, so what if it takes 10 years to graduate, et cetera, then at 16 weeks, she miscarried. Thankfully, that's been the only confirmed one. And I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail, because even 7 years later, I have a hard time getting through it without crying. So it was pretty traumatic. What really ripped me apart was beyond the obvious, was just seeing that attitude in myself of being closed off to the idea of new life. Having seen each of my kids and how unique and wonderful and powerful they are, and knowing, the hopes and the dreams that I had for that month between, when we decided we were happy about this to when we lost him. And how at one point I had set myself against that. I come away from that, and I can't bring myself to set myself against new life. It is good. Every new child is good, no matter what the circumstances are. That new life is good. And if we don't recognize that, and we don't build our lives around that idea that new life is good, all sorts of things start to fall apart. And whether it's your birth rate declines and you have economic issues, or whether it's the mass genocide of people with genetic defects that's been going on with abortion, that costs us a lot. And it's hard to it's hard to go into a world where you put aside other people's potential life and push them away, or you even destroy it in many cases, in the name of your own comfort and prosperity and pleasure, because you don't want to have to change so many diapers, or you don't want to have so much stress in your life, and you just want to sit on the beach and drink daiquiris. hard to walk into that world and sell human rights. Because if at that level you're willing to say, I don't want this person to exist because they get in the way of my daiquiris on the beach. That's a lot closer than you'd think to saying that about somebody who already exists. Because, it's easier because you don't see them. Their potential, they're not there yet. You don't see them, you don't see what you're cutting off from the world. It's easier to weigh that against your petty little things, and justify stopping it. But if you take that attitude and you say that the cost isn't daiquiris on the beach, but maybe the future of your economy, maybe, some environmental disaster, whatever. It's a much shorter stretch to start getting rid of people, And once that starts, they came for the Jews, but I wasn't a Jew, so I said nothing. They came for the Christians, but I wasn't a Christian, so I said nothing. Until then they came for me, and there was no one to defend me. It's funny how you can draw a line from that simple little thing to genocide. And, I always didn't like the Catholics and their prohibition on contraception, and I don't, I'm not gonna say it's wrong. There are mitigating circumstances and so on. I'm not gonna go that route, but I would prefer that to be the default, to not close the door on life. Because it's a much shorter path from closing the door on future life to devaluing current life. And so that's about all I have to say about that. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, and subscribe if you did. And go make some babies. I'm not the only one saying it, but I'm going to say it too, because the future of the world depends on it. The future of goodness, the future of life, the future of everything that you love about this world depends on you making the next generation, you bringing up the next generation with the values that make prosperity possible, that make peace possible, that make love possible. That's on you, So go be fruitful and multiply. And I'll see you next time.